My name's Chris and I repair my own audio equipment, and I also show you how to repair yours. So let's get started.
Are you looking for fun? Are you looking for a good time?
Hello, darlings. Yes, it's me, the titillating temptress in the flesh, and not much else, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And tonight, I have an especially terrifying tale from those monster hitmakers at Bally.
And I've got a tale to tell you myself, how I took an AtGames Legend pinball machine, did some modifications to it, and turned it into one of the most satisfying and fun projects I've ever done. From adding speakers and amplifiers, along with setting up the software to make this virtual pinball machine the very best it can be. So let's get started. The AT Legends pinball machine comes in a pretty good sized cardboard box. It weighs about 100 pounds, so you're going to need some help with it, or you're going to need a lift table or something like I used to get it into the house. It was packed very well. I'd never want to ever try to repack it because it had a lot of different little pieces that go here or there, but I have to say it was packed really in an excellent manner. And the assembly of it was quite straightforward. The main thing you had to do is just put the legs on it. I used the little hex wrench that they included with the pinball machine, and that seemed to work fine. So I got the 4 legs on, and I went ahead and I just stood it up. And my initial reaction is it looks pretty nice, built pretty well. And so the back box, that's the next thing to put on to the main body of the pinball machine. And that was simple enough too. You had to remove the back cover and then just attach it with these 4 wing nuts. And it went right on there, really with no issue. Probably took me half hour or so to put it together to this point. And so I powered it up and see if it would work. And sure enough, she lit up and it looked like I had it up and running. And so all went well there. So this is the last time that this pinball machine's going to be stock. I didn't purchase it to just play the built-in 22 tables. I purchased it because I thought it was the best choice at the best price to be able to play those pinball machines I played in the 60s and 70s and 80s mostly, and even later on in life. So I'm not going to have another review on a stock AtGames Legend pinball machine. There's tons of those out there, but I am going to show you all the modifications that I did and why I did them the way I did them. Because in my case, I'm just not going to play the built-in tables. I did boot it up, as I said, and made sure it worked, and everything seemed to work fine. So I powered it back down and started taking it apart. And so that's what most of the rest of this video is going to show you, are all the different custom things I did to the machine. Did some things that maybe a lot of people wouldn't do for various reasons, and that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to try to give you something a little bit different. For me to be able to play the pinball games that I want to play, the old ones from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I grew up with, I had to purchase a video input backglass switchboard from AtGames that will connect my PC to their pinball machine. And it comes with various components, some wiring and a button. It comes with what's called a VIBS card. That's the little PWBA you see here in this box. And it comes with a cable and a micro switch. All these components will go into the pinball machine. And there's an instruction manual. There's also a guide on AtGames' website that shows you how to install this. But if you're going to connect an external personal computer to the pinball machine, you've got to have this little package. This board is installed at the back of the AtGames Legend pinball machine, and this shows a back view of the pinball machine with 2 covers removed. And this photo here shows you where that VIBS board is going to be installed. So what you see here is just like it comes from the factory. This is what you'd see if you take the covers off a brand new one. I'm also going to install a small LCD display as the DMD display, and that can show you more information during a game. That they started to use those for crude animation and to display the scores back in the early 1990s. Before, you just had the score, told you how many credits you had and if you matched or not, and that was about it. Well, now they could get some crude graphics going on and give you a lot more information while you were playing the game. So I wanted to install that also at the same time. Well, I've got this unit apart. Go ahead and get that done. I'm using an 8-inch display that I got off of Amazon. It's about $100 with the power supply and the controller. There's a lot of different choices out there, and again, I'm not going to go through that because this has been done on this particular model pinball machine many times, and there's a lot of information out there. And as I indicated early in the video, I'm not going to go through step by step, but I wanted to go ahead and show you how I went ahead and did the installation of the different mods I did. So I'll go after the VIBS board first. And there's a video up here that was created by the company who produced both the pinball machines and that accessory that shows you how to install it into one of their pinball machines. The video itself, I think, is excellent. It's very good. The guy who does it takes you step by step and really does it very well. I only have one issue with it, and that's not providing any mounting for that new VIBS board. They expect it just to be hanging in the back of your pinball machine, and that's probably okay. But it's really not a good way of doing things permanently. And I think they could have supplied a couple standoffs and a couple screws, you know, where to go ahead and mount this board, because there's plenty of room for it. I've seen some people mount this board with double-sided tape. That's better than nothing, but I wouldn't recommend that either, because double-sided tape is what it is, and it certainly can come loose and probably will one day. If you put it in with a couple standoffs and a couple screws, it'll always be where it should be. If you go to move it around the house, or you take it on a pickup truck to its new home after you've sold it, or whatever it is, it's going to always be there. And as I indicated, there's a ton of room back here, so I went ahead and I secured this board with just a couple standoffs. The thing doesn't weigh an ounce. You don't need much. You don't have to use all 4 mounting holes that are in this board. I just used 2, and it's not going to go anywhere. And it looks more professional, looks more complete, and maybe that's why I do it too. I'm a little anal about that stuff also. It's up to you what you want to do, but I wanted to show you what I did to mount this particular board. As I mentioned earlier, there's a video up here on YouTube that was produced by the AtGames Corporation.
AtGames Legends Pinball, with the click of a button.
I guess I do have one more bone to pick about their video. They just showed the switch that you have to also install to get this VIBS board to operate and to be able to connect to your PC. They do mention in there that to route the wiring up through the cabinet, but they don't really tell you what to do with the button. And you'll notice whoever was in this video had the button just kind of up about head level, and he was pushing it. Well, you gonna do that? I doubt it. You're going to have your wiring just there. So I've seen, again, various ways people mount the switch, and so now I want to show you what I did. A lot of folks just stick this somewhere up at the front with some double-sided tape or whatever they've got. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but it's just not my cup of tea. So I bored a hole through the bottom at the front left of the cabinet, and it's a very convenient spot to be able to get my finger up under there and just go ahead and hit that button. One thing that you do need, or makes it much easier, is some sort of a wood boring tool, some sort of a spade to be able to cut the hole easily. You could put a drill bit through there, a good sized one, and then cut it out with a saw or whatever by hand. But it's just so much easier to have some sort of a wood boring bit that you can use. So that's what I went ahead and did, because again, it's a much more permanent install and a much neater install. You can't even tell it's there from the outside of the cabinet. So that's what I went ahead and did. And I know some people are thinking, well, you're going to void your warranty. Well, this particular pinball machine really doesn't have much of a warranty. It's got 90 days. That's it. And most of the time, electronics, modern electronics anyway, you power it up, it's on for a few hours and it's all right. It's probably going to be okay for years. It powered up. I got to those original 22 tables, and now I'm going to do what I want to it, and I'm not really worried about the warranty. You may feel differently, and so you've got to make your own choices. Now I'm going to mount the display for my DMD. Earlier I showed you the top panel being out. This picture here shows you the bottom panel in the cabinet, looking at the back of it. And you can see to the left of the main control board for this unit, there's quite a bit of space. And that's where I'm going to mount my controller for my display. Now the display itself, I'm of course going to mount at the front of the back glass and center that there. I'm going to have to cut a little hole through the back box cabinet to be able to sneak those cables down through. And again, I'm going to use standoffs. The same standoffs I used earlier with the VIBS card up above, I'm going to use those down here to mount this board. And again, it'll mount it permanently and won't have to worry about it coming loose or putting strain on these cables. Now, before I mounted all of this permanently, I put it in there temporarily. Makes sense, right? Hook everything up, make sure it's working before you go to all the trouble of mounting it permanently, and then you find out something's not working and you've got to take it all apart. So I went ahead and just temporarily wired everything in and made sure that the work I had done up to this point, which was that VIBS board along with my DMD display, make sure those two things worked before I mounted everything permanently into the cabinet. I just want to share also the PC hardware that I'm using, and it's an AMD 3950X processor, has an NVIDIA RTX 2080 Super video card, 32 gigabyte of RAM. It does have an SSD drive in it. My setup being a 3-screen setup, being the playfield, the back glass, and the DMD, the RTX 2080 comes in handy because it supports 4 monitors. Another mod that I did that many people have done with their AtGames Legends Pinball is to modify the cables at the top of the unit. As you can see here, there's an HDMI cable at the left, a USB cable at the right, and those are required when you're using an external personal computer like I am. So it works fine. It just, look at it, it doesn't look all that great, right, having cords run there. So I went ahead and did what a lot of people do, which is to put a flat HDMI cable along with a flat USB cable under the back box, and it just looks neater. I ended up putting a piece of shrink wrap over each of them just to make them blend in a little bit better. I've got a lot more to show you on the mods that I did on this AtGames Legend pinball machine. But now that I've got the VIBS card installed, and I've got the DMD monitor installed, and I got Windows to recognize all 3 monitors in this pinball machine, I need to work on a little bit of software now. As I mentioned earlier, I'm most interested in those 60s, 70s, and 80s pinball machines, as well as the later ones. I've found out that a lot of these Stern pinball machines that are still being manufactured today, they're a lot of fun. And fortunately, you've got folks out there who are recreating these original pinball machines and getting them to be able to run on your virtual pinball machine. So anyway, I used a program called VPX or VP10, and I just want to point you to a video up here on YouTube. It's part of this video, VPX10, but it's just a great spot to start. It's Pinup Popper Baller Installer. And to make a long story short, it pretty much will cover any of the programs and any of the configurations you may have with your hardware in an easy to install, one-stop, one-shop kind of program. But once you get there and you find that, and you listen to what the gentleman has to say who wrote this program, he's tried to make it easy to get your virtual pinball machine running, and he's done a real good job doing that. So just do a search up here on YouTube about Pinup Popper or Baller Installer, or do a search on Nail Buster Software, which is this channel that did this video, and you'll find out all you need to know about how to get your either your desktop or your cabinet or whatever it is, anything to do with playing virtual pinball. This program will help you do that. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a rant about getting one of these units up and running. I don't mind, first of all, messing around with software and hardware. I've done it my whole life. I grew up in the blue screen of death of Windows. You guys that are older know what that is. Even today, I click the save button on programs over and over and over, thinking it's going to blow up because I learned that back 40 years ago, and it's gone. I can't tell you how many floppy disks I saved programs on because all of a sudden you were reloading Windows. So I don't mind messing around and learning something. It also prevents me from drinking all day long. I can just drink at night. But a lot of people aren't like that. They want this stuff to work. Probably 90% of the people that mess with this stuff. And this is why it's a little bit of a niche hobby, I would say, is you've got people in there that are used to just messing with these files. And in today's world, people are used to just installing something and having it work. And a lot of these people who are very talented, who develop these tables, who do the emulation to take a real table and to put it into a virtual table, I understand. A lot of the stuff took hundreds of hours. I guarantee it did, and several different people. You had to have a lot of different talents work on it, whether you're a programmer, a graphic artist, whatever you happen to be. So I get it. I see a lot of these people who develop these tables get very upset when a vendor puts together an SSD drive or a USB drive with 100 tables, 300 tables. You guys out there who are creating these tables, you're doing a great job and you're doing a wonderful service, but hopefully you're doing it because you love it. People don't want to have like a 3-screen table like I have, install it, and then have it only work on 2 screens. And then go back through the forums to find out what's wrong and have you say go to line 132 of a script and change the 1 to a 0 or the false to a true. I don't mind doing that because I learned a little bit about this stuff, and I was able to get, I would say, 95% of the tables running properly. But many people don't want to mess with this stuff. And then you have pup packs, which bring another complication to it. But yeah, I understand that you guys who are very familiar with it, it's simple to just copy a file over here, copy one over there, and you're done, right? Well, a lot of people don't want to do that. Maybe you don't want to rebuild your toilet. Simple enough to do. About 20 bucks up at Home Depot, get a rebuild kit and do it yourself. But maybe you call a plumber and spend $150 to have it done because you don't want to hassle with it. And that's, you've got to understand, if there's a market for something, if people are selling your tables and your back glasses in packages, it's because there's a market for it. Because all of the tables and all the back glasses you can download for nothing. But it's worth it to people to pay someone else to put it together for them so it works. I also wonder if these creators think it's wrong to take ideas that somebody else came up with. Many of these tables, they're Bally tables, they're Williams tables, they're Stern tables. Somebody else came up with the ideas, the design, the concepts. Graphic artists had to do these play fields and back glasses. You had to have a software engineer put this all together. You had to have a sound engineer. You had to have somebody who made up the rules of the game. There was a lot of time spent on these by a lot of talented people. A creator of a VPX table gets upset because somebody packages their stuff, gets it to work, and makes a buck on it. Now, there are some original tables out there. People who've come up with an idea, a design, a concept, and followed through and did their own graphics and did their own programming and made up their own rules. And so I can understand those people being a little more upset because they created something. These other people are copying something from other people. I don't think there's nothing wrong with it personally. I just don't understand this mentality where you're just so upset that somebody took your stuff when you took somebody else's stuff. Speaking of taking things, I took most of my files from VP Forums and VP Universe, the two sites I just showed you that have that warning about what you should do and shouldn't do when it comes to these files. So there's hundreds of tables available, and it's just going to take a little bit of effort to get those tables installed in your cabinet and get them running properly. So getting back here to the AtGames Legend pinball machine, or the ALPS is for short. Along the top, you see where it says Legends Pinball. That's illuminated, and I didn't like it. A lot of people, it seems, don't like it. It's right above the back glass, and it just is something I didn't like lit up. So I've seen people do all kinds of what I would consider crazy things. Shove a piece of cardboard in there, in through the back side, or try to cover up the light somehow with tape. I don't know why they don't just follow the two leads down to the connector and just remove the ground out like I did. And that way you don't damage anything. You know, if you ever want to put it back for some reason, you can. There's just two wires that come down there, and just pull out the ground side. I wrapped a little bit of electrical tape around the bare pin that I pulled out of the connector, but that just seemed like a lot easier way than trying to cover it up with cardboard or tape. And that did do the trick. So I just wanted to throw that in there too as a little bit of a mod. So after messing around with the hardware here a little bit, obtaining some of these tables, getting VPX installed, it was time for me to just see what I had at this point. I was going to do some more stuff to the pinball cabinet itself, but I thought, well, probably time here to try to get this running and just to see how it operates. Does it operate well? Does it not? And go from there. But let me just give a suggestion for anybody who's doing this, not just with the ALPS, this particular pinball machine, but any virtual pinball setup that you may have. There's a creator called JP Salas, and I may be pronouncing him wrong. I don't know his name wrong. It's JP Salas. And if you search that name and then just throw in virtual pinball, you'll find out that he's done a lot of different tables. And the reason I'm bringing him up, he's worked on many different tables, some original that he's done. And the reason I'm telling you to go find his work, whether it's at his website or on one of these virtual pinball websites, is because all of his tables run well. But I would suggest you download a couple of his older electromechanical tables from the 60s, 70s, maybe a couple from the 80s and 90s, maybe a couple of the later ones from the 2000s, and maybe an original one or two that he's done, and see how your setup works. That is what I would have done, and what I'll do again if I ever build another one of these pinball machines is to go ahead, and you got to start with something known, and his stuff is known. All of his tables operate well, and you can get a real good idea how your hardware is working. He's obviously been into it a long time. He does a great job of putting these tables together. His tables, normally you won't have any trouble getting them to work in your setup. I just recommend you do that. And if I had to start over, I would have just started downloading tables from wherever, thinking they're all going to run the same, because that took me a little bit of time to figure out that these tables do run differently. Some of them feel softer, some of them feel harder, but this guy JP Salas has really done a great job, or Salas, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. If I am, I'm sorry JP, I should have just kept it as that. Download a few of his tables and just see how your setup's working. If it's working well with his tables, then you're free to go and experiment with other tables. If your setup isn't working with his tables, just the opposite. If his tables aren't running well on your hardware, something's not right. As I mentioned, I wanted to test my hardware mods that I'd done already, and so once I'd gotten VPX loaded and some good tables into the Alps, I gave it a shot, and I wasn't disappointed. The Alps really performed well. Again, I'd like to remind you that I'm using a AMD 3950X processor along with an NVIDIA RTX 2080 Super video card. And I show you here the performance of the video card and the CPU. The CPU is just probably as expected, not doing a whole lot, having a pretty easy time of it. The graphic card's fine. You know, it's running in the 70, 80, 90% utilization range, and that's good. It's got plenty of headroom, and even during multi-ball that I'm showing here, it performed really well. It was really smooth. I was really happy with it, and I tried several different tables, not just this one, and they all performed really well. I was real happy where I was at this moment. While I'm talking a little bit about the computer hardware, I think it's a good time to talk a little bit about the hardware that comes in the Alps, the monitors that are in the Alps, and specifically the playfield, which is a 1080p playfield. It's a 32-inch monitor. Its native resolution is 1920 by 1080 pixels. And there's been some complaints out there on the internet it's not that great of a monitor. Well, and that may be true. I mean, I'm sure it's some bulk bought monitor. It's hard to tell what it is, but you know, it seems to function. But one thing I can tell you that really helped out with me as far as the graphic quality was using an NVIDIA software tool. Now this only works if you got an NVIDIA video card. If you got an AMD, I don't know what you do, but if you've got an NVIDIA video card like I do, I used a software rendering technique called DSR. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about what DSR is. You can look it up and see if you want to use it. But I went ahead and used it. And what that does, well, let me just real quick just tell you, it just gives you more detailed resolution. And it makes your eyeballs think you've got a better monitor than you do. And so what I did was to use the NVIDIA DSR software to make this monitor look like a 1440p monitor, or a 2K monitor, or a 2560 by 1440 monitor. It's all the same thing, to both Windows and to Visual Pinball X, the pinball program. And it really made quite a noticeable difference in the playfield. Now this does take some hardware to do this. The video card's going to be under more stress and strain. So if you've got a newer video card like I've got, this one's only a couple generations out, couple years old, you can probably do it. If you're using a video card from 5 years ago, maybe not so much. But it really is an upgrade to the monitor that's in the Alps without doing an upgrade to the monitor. I see some people changing the monitors out, and I really don't think there's a need. Really, if you're going to change the monitors out, this is probably not the pinball machine for you to use and go out and spend your money on something else and build your own. But if you're going to use these monitors, which I think they're adequate, I think they look good. You got to remember though, I was born in the 1950s and I can't hardly see, so maybe that's part of it too. I installed a new audio amplifier along with speakers and a subwoofer. I also drilled holes and added some extra buttons. So let me show you how I went about doing that. In stock form, the AtGames pinball machine really has pretty decent sound from the two speakers that are mounted in the back box, but the sound can be improved on without spending a lot of money if you happen to have an extra sound card. Now in my case, I have a sound card built right into my motherboard like many of the modern motherboards have, a Realtek sound card. Right now, all of the audio is going through the HDMI cable from my computer to the AtGames pinball machine, and that's how I'm hearing the sound through the back box through those two front speakers. Now, if I want to hear sound through these additional speakers in the subwoofer, I'm going to have to run another audio out to those speakers. And the way I do that is via my sound card. So I'm going to have sound coming through the HDMI cable like I have now. I'm going to add my sound card into the mix to go ahead and supply audio to my new speakers and my subwoofer. So how do you go about doing this? Well, as I explained before, I'm not going to go through in detail about everything. I just kind of hit on what I did because a lot of this stuff is already available up here on YouTube and other spots on the internet where you can do this yourself if you need to, but I just want to show you a quick overview. You have to do some software modifications in Windows to get this to operate. It's not real complicated. You've got to do a thing with the stereo mix, and also you have to do a little bit within Visual Pinball X. You have to go into the audio options and do a little bit of maneuvering around there. So like so much of this stuff, as I started in the beginning, this is not a hobby for somebody who wants it just to work, right? You've just got to tinker with it. It's just how it is. It's not that difficult to do, but like so many things in life, it's difficult until you know how to do it, right? And that was the same way with me. It took me a little time to get this going, but take it step by step and you'll be able to do it also. So I used pretty much the standard speakers that a lot of people use in virtual pinball machines. I didn't want to spend a ton of cash on this particular unit. This isn't a high-end virtual pinball machine, but I wanted to go ahead and add things to this machine that would really improve it, but not spend a lot of money on it. And the only thing I can say is, as far as the amplifier goes, get an amplifier that has a subwoofer speaker output in it. So you've got a left channel, a right channel, and then you've got a sub out. Now the haptics are a joke. They could have spent another 25 cents and done something better than to put these two little rattling devices that AtGames considers haptic speakers. These are mounted right under the top panel that I show here in the picture where it says Legends Pinball, and first thing you ought to do is just rip those out of there. Rip them by the wires, do whatever you want, take them out, just get rid of them. They're an embarrassment. They're just pieces of junk. The haptic speaker, what its job is to give you that feel of a real pinball machine that a digital machine doesn't have. So it gives you that vibration. You feel it. When it hits a bumper, you get a feedback. And the ones that are built into this pinball machine, as I mentioned, are just very poor. But fortunately, for not much money, around 20 bucks, you can get something that really works well. So as you can tell, this is basically a subwoofer, right? You know, me being the audio guy, I thought about taking an 8-inch woofer I've got sitting here. I still got it sitting right here on the table next to me, and cutting a big hole in the bottom of this beast. And let's put a real subwoofer in here and not one of these little mini bass shakers. But I was really surprised. It really does a good job. So I didn't think it was necessary to cut a big hole in the bottom, but one of these days I may do it anyway, just because I can. So I installed the Dayton speakers, the two exciters as they call them, the left and right channel exciter, along with the mini bass shaker, and it really made a big difference. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's some software that has to be done. And let me mention too, while I'm thinking about it, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, Pinscape Build Guide. Just search on that, or search on Pinscape, and what you're going to find there is really the ultimate build guide to a virtual pinball machine. It's got it all. And we're talking about audio systems right now. This gentleman, he went through here and just gave the ultimate guide. It must have took forever to do this. And this is just on the audio part of it. And he goes through in detail about the different configurations, the benefits of some and over others, and he talks about how to set it up in Windows, and just amplifiers, speakers, you name it. And you think, well, that's all he's got. Well, that's just the audio section. So if you go to the table of contents, he's got everything from beginning to end. Pick the subject. If it has to do with a virtual pinball machine, it's in here. So incredible amount of work that went into this guide. I have a lot of appreciation for people who can do this. Really incredible. I also installed a secondary amplifier, and you guys will just have to do some research on your own of which one you want to use. There's a bunch out there, and they're all price ranges. But again, I bought a fairly inexpensive one off of Amazon, and it seems to work fine. So with me, the issue I saw with putting an external amplifier was being able to get to it, to adjust it. You can't put it inside the cabinet, right? Because all of these tables, you'll find out, are all different. They all sound different, and also we all have different ears. We all like sounds in a different manner. So I wanted this amplifier's controls in a position where I could adjust them easily without having to reach under the cabinet or open the cabinet or use windows. I didn't want to use windows, even though you could, to adjust the volume. I want to play with the subwoofer. I want to play with the treble, the bass, etc., etc. And the only way to do that was to cut a hole in the cabinet. Actually, before I installed the amplifier, I went ahead and did some modifications to the cabinet as far as the push buttons are concerned. You know, the buttons that are on the side of any pinball machine. You have a couple buttons at least to use for your left and your right flipper. The AtGames pinball machine has 2 flipper buttons on each side, which is nice. And I thought, well, why not a third one? Why? Because again, I can. So I went ahead and installed a third button on each side of the cabinet. I also installed another button right by the plunger. Many of the modern machines don't even have a plunger. They just have a button you push to launch the ball. So I thought that would be kind of cool. So I wanted to install some extra ones. Some I thought I would use, maybe some I wouldn't. Didn't really matter. And I also went ahead and ordered some gold leaf push buttons because doing my research, it seemed like everybody loved them and they were relatively inexpensive. So I thought, why not install those, and at the same time I'll replace the ones that came in the AtGames pinball machine. I didn't really see any problem with them. They seem to work all right for me, but everybody loves these gold leaf push buttons, so I thought, geez, again, I've got it all apart. For just a few bucks, I can go ahead and upgrade those. To get these buttons installed, when you drill in a hole, you need some sort of a wood spade set. Many of you probably have something. If you don't, you're going to need one. And if you use a spade and just a battery-operated drill will work fine. It'll go right through this stuff, no problem. Then you'll be able to put new buttons in if you decide to do that with yours. So, of course, you need a way to get the input from these buttons back to your computer. And what I used was a couple of really inexpensive USB to joystick boards. It comes with the cables. It comes with the interconnect wiring, and they were like 16 bucks for 2 of them. I only needed one, I thought, but I got 2 of them for 16 bucks, so they're really inexpensive. And of course, what I did first was to try this out just on the table. So I plugged in the USB into my computer and I hooked up one of the buttons just here on the table, and I went ahead and tried it. And sure enough, it worked fine. Windows recognized the controller, and it recognized whatever button I was pushing. So that was good to go. I'm also using a shareware program called Joy to Key, and that will allow me to map the USB controller that I just showed you and the buttons in the pinball machine to a function within the visual pinball program. So I'm not going to get again into detail about this too much because many people have covered it and covered it better than I, but I just want to bring this up also. It's a great program. It works great. There seems to be no lag in it that I can see. And as I said, it's free to download. It is shareware. And after 30 days, they ask you to register it for $7. Which I thought was a bargain. So I went ahead and registered my copy of it for $7. And I think if you use it within your virtual pinball machine, you'll find $7 worth of value in it. If there's one area of digital pinball that is the least realistic, at least in my opinion, is the nudging of the table. You guys who play pinball know that's part of the game. the feel of the table. That ball's getting ready to drain down the side. Well, you give it a rock, right? You try to get it out of that side without tilting the machine. Some machines tilt it easy, others you can almost pick them up. And you guys that played pinball know that. Well, fortunately, there is a way to emulate that in a digital pinball machine. You can create an analog environment with an accelerometer. Normally, these programs, they just have a digital nudging system. You hit a key and it kind of shakes the ball a little bit. You hit another key, it shakes it a little bit in the other direction. You hit another key, it kind of shakes it in the center. Anyway, it's very unrealistic. And to get around this digital nudging, most people use a product that's manufactured by a company called NXP, and it's an FRDM-KL25Z. This piece of hardware is what the Pinscape software that I mentioned earlier runs on. This board will do a lot more than just the nudging also. That's all I'm using it for. But you can use it with the plunger. You can use it with the buttons, unlike what I'm using. You can use it for many, many different things. And when you download the Pinscape software, all of these features are within that software that will run on this piece of hardware, this KL25Z. And as I mentioned, I'm just using it for the nudging, and it works really well. It really operates much more like a real pinball machine. You can nudge it and the ball moves naturally instead of being herky or jerky or whatever. It really works really well. So that is one item. You don't have to add buttons. You don't have to do nothing else. But get one of those boards, load Pinscape, and at least use the accelerometer feature of this board along with that Pinscape software. It just takes the playability of this AtGames Legend pinball machine to the next level. Once again, I'm not going to go into the details about where you should mount this board or how you should mount it or how you get the Pinscape software loaded onto this KL25Z board. It's not very difficult. You just have to follow the Pinscape instructions that I showed you earlier, because there's other people up here on YouTube that have done a lot better job of explaining the details. I just want to show you an overview of what can be done to a virtual pinball machine that can really get it very close to the real thing. After doing the modifications and testing them out, I went ahead and put everything in neatly first before I went ahead and closed up the Legends pinball machine. Would anybody see the wires all over the place inside the cabinet? No, but I would know they were all over the place inside the cabinet. Took me a few minutes to go ahead and just tie wrap everything into position, made it look neat, made it look professional before I went ahead and closed up the machine. And then I took a couple evenings to enjoy it and just try it out and test everything out that I'd already done, and just let's see how it works. I really enjoy this AtGames pinball machine with the modifications I put in it. I think it's outstanding the way it operates. I've probably got about $1,000 invested in the machine and the modifications I did. And again, I'm in the United States. I know some of you guys are not in the United States, and so I've got about $1,000 US into this setup. I really enjoy playing it. And if something like this existed back when I was going to the arcades back in the 1970s and into the 80s, they had some machine there that could play hundreds of machines as well as this one does, I think all the other machines would have been obsolete. I understand it's not a replacement for a, quote, real pinball machine. The digital pinball machine's never going to. I don't care if it's a 4K, an 8K, 180,000K. It's never going to be the same as playing real pinball. But boy, it can be really a lot of fun. And isn't that the whole thing? Getting your money's worth out of something? So I don't see there's anything to dislike about this machine. I was a little worried. I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm about 6'2" and a half. And I was thinking this machine, see, it's about a 3/4 machine. It's not full size. Is this thing going to bend me over too much? Am I going to be uncomfortable on it? I really wasn't. And so I'm very comfortable playing this machine, standing behind it for an hour or two. And I think down the road, I'm going to play it quite a bit. And I enjoyed the project too, the project side of it. As you guys know, I work on mostly vintage audio equipment, but I work on other stuff too. And this is kind of like up my alley. I like projects. It keeps me busy, and it was a lot of fun. It was fun to try to figure out the software. It was fun to try to figure out the hardware. I find myself pushing on the machine. I find myself getting, I can't use the word I want to use, but I find myself getting upset with the machine, and so it really, I lose the fact that it is a virtual pinball machine. I just think modern technology, the hardware and software, has really done a wonderful job of emulating those old pinball machines. Is it perfect? No, but boy, is it a lot of fun. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up down below. For you non-subscribers, I'd really appreciate a subscription. And for my present subscribers, as always, thank you so much. You all have a good day.